So it is 8:30, and I will call the Committee of the Whole meeting of February 21st to order. And we have in front of us an agenda. Are there any additions to that agenda? Okay, and we're just going to make a note that we're going to switch this agenda up, and we're going to do the budget presentation last, before the closed session. Other than that, Councillor Christie.
If not, I'll move the agenda as moved.
Yeah, okay. We're going to take the agenda as presented, knowing we're going to switch it up. Yeah. All those in favor? Okay, and that's carried unanimously. Thank you. We have the minutes from the November 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting that were pre-circulated. Any corrections, omissions, errors? If not, Councillor Cunningham.
I'll move the minutes as presented.
Thank you. So I have a motion to accept the minutes of the November 22nd meeting as presented. All those in favor? And that is also carried unanimously. Thank you. All right. In our agenda then, we are moving on to item 4.0, which is the Renewable Energy Information Package. And welcome, Ms. Hazelton.
Perfect, thank you.
And when you're ready.
Thanks. At the January 24th, 2023 Council meeting, Council directed administration to prepare an information package for landowners considering leasing land for renewable energy, and to also include information for landowners that may be affected by a renewable energy project. A fact sheet has been prepared based on the current legislation that outlines several things that should be considered by a landowner looking to lease their land for a renewable project. It also highlights some potential concerns an adjacent landowner may have with a project. For an adjacent landowner, they are encouraged to utilize the public process provided by the AUC to have their concerns considered and/or addressed. We have also provided links to the larger document done by the Farmers Advocate, as well as the AUC website. Administration will ensure council is aware of any proposed projects once we know a company has signed an agreement with the landowner and are proposing to move forward with the project. This will enable council to communicate with their constituents and provide information regarding the process and how to get involved. Since legislation is constantly changing, which makes it more difficult to keep documents current, administration is proposing to utilize the fact sheet and to provide any other information directly from the source for ratepayers that want additional information. So again, we've attached the fact sheet for you guys' reference, and we just are looking for some feedback regarding the fact sheet and whether or not this is sufficient in what you were thinking as the package to be provided, or we're certainly open to adding more things to it.
Okay, thank you. Comments or questions? Councillor Cunningham.
So I was just wondering, in the RFD, the part about administration will assure council is aware of proposed projects. I'm just wondering, like, is the planning department or the county privy to when a landowner signs an agreement?
We're not privy to the agreement. We're only privy once after the fact, yeah.
Right.
If somebody does ask us, but I guess the end goal would be to put this on the website and to make sure people are aware of that, that we do have some information. Because typically those agreements are done once in a while. They will come talk to us ahead of time.
Right.
But
right. So I was just wondering, so is this, would this follow the same as any other planning projects, that you would let us know when an agreement has been signed?
we'll let you know as soon as we're aware, because the company then usually comes to us to say, what is your process? How do you want it to go forward? And that at that point, once we know an agreement has signed, then we check to see whether something's been put against title. And then if it has, we will make you aware.
So I was just wondering, is that the same for all projects, or is this just?
No,
like
it would just be more for renewable.
Okay.
Are there any other questions or comments? Reeve Whitstock.
Yeah, it looks pretty detailed. The one thing that I didn't see there, and it probably doesn't need to be there, but it would sure be nice for the landowner to know that getting a lawyer to take a look at the lease agreement prior to signing may give him a better idea of what exactly it is that he could be liable for. But I don't know where you would possibly say that, have your lawyer look at it, because I think it's the individual's responsibility to make sure he knows what he's signing. So I guess that's just a comment.
Yep, and we can certainly add something in there.
Well, I don't know if we want to or not, but I'm putting it out there, I guess, because we are on air. So my 2 bits would be have a lawyer take a look at it, and probably a good lawyer look at it.
Councillor Penner.
I actually really like that idea, because every agreement is different, and they can't just compare with the neighbor or whatever, because every company's agreement is different, and I've been told that firsthand from some people who are already doing this and have found out the hard way.
And just before we go any further, I think we should note that at the bottom of the first page of that, it does say that you should be looking to engage a legal professional to ensure your interests and potential risks are covered. So on the first page, it is, Carolyn, right at the bottom there. Yep. But.
Yeah, I thought we had put it somewhere and
Yeah.
I was trying to find it quick, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Yeah, no, we can actually maybe change the font color there if you want to make that
Just make it
jump a little
stand
bit.
out.
Yeah,
Okay. Councillor Christie.
Just observing the one that we have being built now where they've gone around the existing oil lease on the north side. The oil companies are trying to cut their rental rates back just to the well site, not their whole site. So that changes how you want to negotiate that right away, because all of a sudden you're going to lose 6 or 7 acres to an oil lease that's not paying anything versus one of these. So I mean, that definitely you need legal advice and figure out what you're doing with that, because there's not many quarters in our county that don't have at least one lease on them.
Yes, Mr. Gannon.
Through the chair, thank you. We could put, we can put the lawyer comment a little, probably more prevalent at the beginning of the document, and just explain, because legislation and everything changes so quickly, in order to stay relevant to the changing environment, it would be our opinion to seek legal advice prior to moving forward with any agreement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cunningham.
Just one thing I'd point out too with, in regards to the adjacents, when we talk about the AUC hearing, I think it should be noted, or people should be aware that if there is a hearing granted, they are able to have legal representation, and it will be covered, the cost will be covered by the AUC, to my understanding.
Okay, Councillor Penner, go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just through a little bit of investigating with some people that have got these on their place, they don't have to use a right-of-way. They're trying to get away from using right-of-ways, because then they have to be brought up to code if they've got to build them up, you know, so they're putting them on private land. So landowners need to be aware of this, and through legal advice, it's very important, because there are some black soil roads in that, but they do not want to use them, right, because they've got to bring them up to that municipality's code, to that site. And correct me if I'm wrong, but this is just from doing a little bit of investigation. So they're putting them actually on landowners' land. So they're taking more land than they really is necessary, especially when there is a right-of-way there.
yeah, now, I know we've been approached, so if the road is existing and it's a well-driven road, they're probably wanting to go in the right-of-way. But if it's not, because we don't typically, for utilities, make them upgrade the road, correct? Yeah.
Mr. Zier.
Sorry, thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, through the chair, that's correct. Anytime anyone utilizes a county road allowance, we do have certain standards they have to build their road up to, depending on the use that they're intending with it. So as Barb said, yeah, there is a requirement based on the intensity and based on the future use of it.
Okay. So basically, if they're developing on an undeveloped road allowance, they're likely having to look at doing something with that road allowance.
Yeah,
Correct.
but if they're just running the wire, then they may not.
Right.
It would be like any other utility.
Like a power pole.
Yeah.
Power line construction. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Penner. No, have
This is
some.
very minor, but when I first opened this up over the weekend to look at it, it just grabbed me with solar, with the picture. I'd like to see both
Okay,
there because wind is just as concerning as solar for some residents. So I know it's down further, there's two pictures.
Yep.
But just that, the first part really grabbed me.
Okay, any other questions or comments? I know earlier we had a little bit of conversation around the potential of having a information session. Is there any desire for that to happen for our landowners or not really? Councillor Forbes first and then Councillor Cunningham.
We're all fighting to talk today. I think it's a great idea to have the engagement, even if the county brought in a speaker from the farmers advocacy. So we're just showing that we are engaged with our ratepayers, but we're not taking a side. It's just for information only, that we might not be able to put into such a small document.
Okay, Councillor Cunningham.
She stole my wind, as she says. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so no, I think I made that comment at one of our other meetings. I think it'd be very beneficial. It's a live, Q&A, gives people kind of real-time ability to ask questions. So I'm all about that. And I know one of the neighboring municipalities has put this, or the document that the Farmers Advocate provided on their website. So I think that might be another good idea. And one other thing I just wanted to touch on, the part where it says the municipality can still require a development permit. And I understand we can't be inconsistent with the AUC and we can't touch on things they've already dealt with. But I can still, to me, I wouldn't see a scenario where we never would have a development agreement.
no, some don't though. They treat them like the AER. So it's up to that municipality. We require one.
Okay, so I guess just the wording
Oh,
can still, to me, it
okay.
would be the municipality will require a development permit.
Okay.
Councillor Penner.
Just furthermore to Councillor Forbes' discussion there, I think it's great that we have something. As a county, we don't get a lot of response. I would like to see our ag societies or whoever come forward and put that, and I put it out to a couple of them to come up with some ideas, and maybe we can assist them or not, whatever, but I think they get a better response when it comes from the local society rather than the municipality. I could be wrong, but I think some local groups should get together and put something forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Forbes.
Personally, just for me, I do agree with you on most of that, Deb. Councillor Penner, sorry.
Okay, I prefer the other way.
If we're going to do that, then at least if they can phone and get the information on how and who they can contact, that would be something I'd want to see if you're asking the ag societies or anyone who has concerns about these coming to our county. So just so that the information is provided, a little help from us
Oh, for
without us
sure.
doing it.
For sure, and something like that would be on our Facebook pages and everything else. And I'm all for some kind of engagement, no questions. But in the past, we haven't had a great response as a municipality putting it on, and I think when it comes back, you throw it back into the local hands, there seems to be a bigger response. They take it a little bit more serious or something. I don't know what it is, but.
Any other comments? I don't want to lose the idea of the interaction and information session. And so it's not really what we came to talk about either, but since we're in the green energy side, I thought I'd put it out there. Any other comments with regard to the document that's in front of us, which would go on our website, I'm going to assume, and if we're going to put it on our website, can we also, somebody said something about the Farmers Advocate document close by there too?
Yeah, we can
I
add
know
that.
the link is
The
in.
link is actually on this one.
Yes, yep.
So once this is there, they can click on the link. But I have provided that document when we've got somebody considering leasing land and they happen to come to us first. But I'm still watching to see if they've signed agreements because,
Reeve Whitstock.
Whether or not we have a pure information session dealing with this, we could probably deal with it when we have our county annual ratepayer meeting. I mean, we don't have to get into detail on it, but we can provide that information at that point in time too. Because I think we're gonna probably end up with more people coming to that than coming to this, but I'm just guessing there. Not too many landowners are actually affected by the, okay, there's far more neighbors affected by these developments than there is actual ratepayers that are affected by it, so. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
It is a bit of a hot button subject out there right now, and for sure, we're likely going to hear more, and so. What's our wish? It's up to us to give direction to administration in terms of what we want to do. Knowing that this is coming back to a council meeting for approval, am I correct in that? We're not.
we'll do the edits that you've requested, and if this isn't sufficient, you can let us know and we can draft some more.
I guess
Councillor
what
Penner.
are you wanting to hear from? Is it, yeah, please go ahead and.
Is this sufficient for you from us to put this on the website, or would you like to see a greater package? We can always print and make packages available at the front for anybody that is interested in more information. We can certainly print out the Farmers Advocate piece and have that available, but I'm just looking for what you guys want to see.
Councillor Penner, are you follow up?
I don't want it any longer on the, you know what I mean? But there should be, if there's more detail, it should be available for them. You want to catch their attention right off the bat, you know, but I don't know, put it out there to everybody. What do you think? How much information do you want on the internet?
Councillor Cunningham.
I'm just wondering if it would be possible for Ms. Hazelton to bring it back to another meeting with the changes and then, you know, to see if that's, you know, the way it looks sufficient.
Yeah, it will come back to council.
Okay.
We're just suggesting edits and changes we might like to see, and then we'll see a final document or another document that we can edit if we're not happy. Councillor Christie, you had a comment?
I just thought it might be a good page to put with our quarterly news release, the written one that you mail out.
Any other comments? Any further direction that we want to give? I guess I'm looking for any further comment. Mr. Hogan, please.
Through Mr. Chair. So I think we've got, from admin's perspective, we know that there's some amendments to be made to this and to bring those back to council. Council did have the discussion around the speaker session. And so again, I don't know that there's been a couple of different ideas put out about the way to do that. But I think if that is something that Committee of the Whole wants to recommend, that maybe a motion that Committee of the Whole recommend council undertake a speaker session regarding renewable energy. And then it's captured on, you know, we don't necessarily need to get out the details of that today. I do think that there is maybe some merit to tying those into our discovery nights even if we had a breakouts like it to the side or something like that. We do tend to capture an audience with those. Whether that timing works was a different question, but we can sort through that stuff. We don't have to make that decision today.
Okay, just a further comment by me, I guess, is if we were going to book somebody like the gentleman from the Farmers Advocate, I think a bigger session would be probably advisable, whether we do that in cooperation with ag societies and ag service board or council or whoever. We'd have to examine what that might look like. Because if we're gonna try to bring a speaker in and we're gonna have 2 discovery nights or whatever and try to tie it with that, then that means we have to bring that speaker for both of those events, and that becomes more problematic, so. Councillor Forbes, you had a comment?
Because I've read this so many times, and I'm not sure where I get the information. Is there something in here about end of life of these? Because if there
Yes.
isn't, could you,
Yes,
there is?
yeah, first
Okay.
page.
Yeah.
On the first page in the 4th paragraph, it talks about liability management, and then says there's nothing similar to orphan wells, and landowners may become liable at the end of life.
I'm not sure if you can make that a little more bold so that people understand that, because I don't think everybody understands. I mean, the landowner could be also on the hook for it, but so might the county if it ever comes down to that. And that concerns me.
Okay.
Sounds like you got a lot of bold font coming there. And that's one of the advantages of having a engagement, is that you can emphasize some things that's hard to emphasize in a written document. Because you can put everything that you think everybody needs to know in this written document, but when they read through it, whether it actually catches their attention or not, that's where the whole problem comes. Whereas somebody standing up and saying, "Are you aware?" And the guys who've already signed these contracts, yeah, so further direction, we're looking for what would we like to ask administration to do? We take Mr. Hogan's suggestion and ask administration to come back with some ideas on engagement. Okay, then somebody would need to make a motion to that effect. Councillor Penner.
I'll make the motion that council, start again, that the committee of the whole recommends to council to organize a speaker session regarding renewable energy.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion to ask administration, actually to recommend to council, I guess. Yep. Everybody's aware what the intent is? All in favor? That looks like it's carried unanimous. And then for this particular document, do we need to make a motion, or do you understand the direction? It's just coming back to council.
Yes, I think we can, I think we're good without a motion on this one.
Okay.
So we know the amendments to be made. It'll appear on a future council meeting, so we'll be good.
Okay. All right. Are we prepared to be done with this particular item, or any further comment or discussion? Not seeing any. I'm going to say thank you, Ms. Hazelton, for being here and presenting on renewable energy. Thank you. Okay, we'll move in our agenda then to 5.0, which is Council Code of Conduct Bylaw Review. And this is all about us. And Ms. Vanderkill quill. Are you taking this, Carolyn, or is Mike presenting? It says presented by.
Sure, I'll take this one. So as per legislation, each council must review and update their council code of conduct bylaw at least once every 4 years, starting from the date when the code of conduct bylaw was passed. The last time council's current code of conduct bylaw was passed was February 12th, 2019. The Code of Conduct for Elected Officials Regulation 200-2017 states that the bylaw should include the following: apply to all councilors equally, provide sanctions for breaching the Code of Conduct, include the following topics listed below. A complaint system needs to be established, and a complaint system must address the following, which is listed on your RFD. On September 25th, 2018, Kneehill County participated in a municipal accountability review program, and our councillor code of conduct bylaws 1766 at that time did not meet legislative requirements. There was a clause in this bylaw that included a sanction to request the minister to investigate the councillor's conduct and request their removal from council. To be compliant, administration needed to remove the statement and request the removal from council, as it was not within council's authority to remove a councillor. All other legislative requirements were met. Council made those changes to their current bylaw 1783, and there has been no changes to the legislation in the past 4 years. However, council can make any changes to this bylaw as they see fit. A new bylaw will need to be established at a minimum to change the dates to the new bylaw. Once a new bylaw has been established, every councillor will need to sign the statement of code of ethics and conduct.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments by anyone? Councillor Forbes.
Under, 5.2 expenditures, number 5, could we include, because I've had ratepayers ask why my stuff isn't being put on the website in a timely manner for my expenditures, what I'm doing. Could we have it where it's within 30 days after the end of the current month? So it gives you time to do it on admin aspect of it and still makes them happy.
Is there a time component that's required?
No, there isn't any time requirement. Actually, you don't actually have to put your expenses on legislatively, but you as a council do it for transparency reasons.
Okay, currently it says in a timely manner or whatever.
Yeah, however, we have changed the website is now updated with all council remunerations. And as you pass them through and I review them, they should go right onto the website through Laserfiche.
Okay, any comment, questions? Councillor Cunningham.
I do have a ratepayer that likes to keep an eye on that, and I believe, and I could be missing it, but I don't believe it's been updated since October of '22. But correct me if I'm wrong, please.
I'm pretty sure it has been updated, but I'll look into it.
Councillor Penner.
So, Ms. Vanderkill, you're saying when any of our remittance are done and submitted to us, it's ticked behind the scenes or whatever, that it would go directly to the websites?
Yeah.
So we've got a new program, correct, that we've updated, so it's been in the working?
Yeah, it was glitchy there for, not glitchy, but it wasn't connecting right away, but we have rectified that within this new year. It has been updated and changed.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Councillor Cunningham.
So just in terms of the confidentiality part, I know we've talked about this a little bit, and I have no problem adhering to that. But I just wonder if it could be a little bit of an overall kind of reminder to everybody, because I know I do get approached, whether it's at the post office or grocery store, in regards to some things that perhaps shouldn't be out in the public. So I guess just a subtle reminder to everyone that I guess we all need to adhere to that would be good, please.
Okay, any other comments? All right, this is my, Reeve Whitstock.
Just have a question. So I know that, oh, I lost it here. There is a reference to removing some wording from that document, because council does not have the authority to remove a counselor. We are going to make that change. Is that correct?
The change was made last time, so we,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
yeah, so 4 years ago, we did make that change, and it
So
hasn't,
in 19.
2019, yeah.
Yeah.
We made that change.
Okay, all right. Thanks.
Okay, so then, sorry, so I'm assuming then we're going to see this document come back to us just with the change date and a few other things. So before that happens, could we change all the Ls to doubles or singles in counselor? Can we make sure that Kneehill has only 2 Ls instead of 3, as it is in one particular instant, which is right on our front page? And can we switch up in camera to closed session and AA, M, D, and C to RMA? Just little things that my OCD kind of goes, "Ooh." Sorry. But initially in the document, we go back and forth between counselor and counselor with 2 Ls and 1 L. And then we tend to settle down and went with 2 Ls throughout the rest. So just those little things that, I don't know, they always seem to catch my attention. Sorry. Any other comment or discussion related to this particular item? If not, I'm going to assume that we've provided sufficient feedback and we will be seeing this again at a council meeting.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I think we've got everything we need. My only recommendation would be the committee of the whole recommend that the updated bylaw be forwarded to council for approval,
Okay,
or that council approve the updated bylaw. With what you'll see come forward will include those grammatical changes.
okay. So we're basically going to make a motion that the committee of whole recommends to council to amend the bylaw. And are we recommending council? Bring it back? Okay. Is there any questions or comments before somebody makes that motion? Councillor Christie.
I'll make the motion to recommend the council to approve the updated code of conduct bylaw.
Okay, so we have a motion to recommend to council that the code of conduct bylaw as updated be accepted. So, any further comment, questions? If not, all those in favor? And that is carried unanimously as well. Mr. Hogan, did you have a thought? Okay. You're looking contemplative there. All right. So that was easy. Now, before we get into the budget, does anybody want a quick break, or are we good to go for a while? Good to go? All right. So we're going to go to 3.0, which is the budget book presentation. And welcome Ms. Von Meerbach and Ms. Kinza Marnie on YouTube or via video conference. So you are coming through well, yes. Yep. As you are prepared, yes, you please go ahead. Yep.
Want to note that Kneehill County, I believe the next slide, Marika, if you're managing that piece. Kneehill County has received the
Kinsey, if we just get you to hold for a minute, we have
Yeah.
lost your sound, so we're just making some adjustments at this end. So if you don't mind, just hold on for a minute.
Not a problem.
There, I think you're back.
Is it better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, feel free to please stop me if you lose any audio connection. As I was noting, Kneehill County has received the Distinguished Budget Presentation Award from the GFOA for the second year in a row. This award is received by governmental units that publish a budget document that meets the criteria as a policy document, a financial plan, an operations guide, and as a communications device. So it's the highest form of recognition in governmental budgeting, and we're quite proud to have received that for the second year in a row. The budget that is being presented to you for 2023 is designed such that it will also meet the criteria for this award, and we'll be looking to submit for a potential award for a third year in a row. As I highlighted earlier, there is a budget book that was provided to Council this morning. It is equipped with a reader's guide that speaks to the various components that's outlined within the document. However, I will give you a brief overview, a high-level overview of the contents of the document. The first 5 components that are listed here on this slide provide basically a general overview of the budget that's being presented to Council for consideration. It highlights the pertinent financial policies that are followed by administration on a day-to-day basis and which were also followed during the budget process. And that section is wrapped up with a community profile, which gives a highlight overview of the environment in which the county operates. The departmental budgets outline each department's specific budget, and it also highlights the significant achievements within those departments during the 2022 year, as well as the direction and goals for 2023. So one of the pieces I do want to note for you, which is a new component this year, is the inclusion of the performance metrics for each department. Now, this is a requirement of the GFOA award, and those metrics are used to assess the efficiency and effectiveness of various projects, programs, and initiatives that the county undertakes. Administration will monitor those metrics regularly, which will ensure that we're better equipped and positioned to adjust strategies as required if the results indicate that we're not moving towards the metrics that were defined when the information was put together. The operating budget projects highlight one-time initiatives and projects approved within the 2023 operating budget. And the capital budget likewise outlines capital projects and their funding sources for the 2023 year. The reserves component, which is almost toward the end of the document, outlines the county's reserve funds, including budgeted contributions and draws from those reserves. The debt section outlines the debt limit the county operates within. And the final component, which is the glossary, that serves as a resource for the reader, clearly laying out the various acronyms and budget terms that are used within the document, so it provides greater clarity for the reader. Now we'll go into the operating budget. Right here, we'll talk about the budget preparation, which I will highlight the guidelines and processes that administration follows when developing the budget for council's consideration. I'll provide a bit of a situational recap of what you heard last week, so highlighting some of the key challenges that the county currently faces and the key points that position the organization well for moving forward. From there, Marika will provide an overview of the proposed core operating budget. She will highlight for you any variances from last year and review with council the proposed reserve contributions along with the reserve draws and their proposed allocations. She will close off her component with a summary of the proposed budget and the total impacts that we'll see as a result of that. So you'll recall on October 11th of last year, Council adopted the 2023 budget guidelines, and those are noted here on the slide in front of you. So there was a total of 7 budget guidelines. So we had advancement of Council's strategic plan, keeping tax rates competitive, ensuring rates and fees for services are appropriate, maintain existing service levels, incorporate a proactive infrastructure renewal plan, improve customer service, and identify and incorporate efficiencies. So with those guidelines in place, they are intended as a formal set of guiding principles for both the budget and forecasting process. And once those were established by Council, administration worked towards the development of the 2023 budget. It is important to note that the budget continues to follow rigorous budgetary process focused on cost containment efforts and implementing best practices with the goal of demonstrating leadership in financial management. So to support those cost containment efforts and ensure the provision of the lowest possible tax increase while maintaining levels of service for the community, administration has continued to freeze most account budgets at 2020 levels unless cost pressures are documented that warrant a necessary increase in those. It established and followed strict process to evaluate funding requests, and I'll speak a little bit more about that in a few moments. We've utilized a thorough multi-layer review process and reinforced priorities through business planning and best practices. On to our next slide. So in addition to the guiding principles that are set by council, the budget design process includes the consideration of multiple factors by administration. So and we want to ensure that the budget that is presented meets the guidelines established. We take into consideration things like legislative impacts, such as provincial policy changes that have the potential to impact the overall budget. Things like existing standards and the retention of those service standards, with a goal of minimizing any service impacts to the community. The services that the community receive are important to the community, and it's important that we're able to meet those expectations and retain those levels of service. We look at from there where we may have some deficiencies in service and make the necessary adaptations to address those and return them to council's adopted levels of service. And as we talked about last week, the county does continue to face cost pressures due to multiple factors, such as both realized and potential funding cuts. When we look at the MSI funding, we have some funding cuts there and some uncertainty around what that might look like when the local government fiscal framework model is adopted. We also look at things like provincial policy changes. For example, things like the tax holidays on all of the new wells between 2022 to 2024. And also the potential for things like provincial downloading, where we saw some shifts in the policing funding model for rural municipalities. So those all serve as key points of consideration for us. And as a final piece, administration also looks at growth, taking into consideration the existing assessment for the county and the forecasted growth in assessment over the coming years. The budget design and development is, like I had alluded to earlier, is quite an extensive process that really reinforces priorities through business planning, evaluation, and best practices. The budget that is presented to you today, or will be presented to you today, was designed initially by managers across the organization. It underwent multiple layers of review prior to being presented to council today. Each department budget is reviewed and endorsed by senior management and the C.O.W, as well as vetted through the finance department. All of this vetting is really to ensure we've adopted cost containment efforts where appropriate and not increased budgetary lines without taking into consideration trending and demand. It's also to ensure alignment between the budget and the costs that we're incurring in council strategic plan, and that those align, and the budget guiding principles that were adopted by council, and ensuring we have alignment with those. So municipal budgeting itself, the budget is really a policy and planning document that outlines the municipality's priorities, and it's really a balancing act in many ways between often competing priorities. On one end, the budget must take into consideration the needs of the community, ensuring the provision of high levels of service that ratepayers have come to expect, the prudent management of critical infrastructure that supports the provision of those services, as well as compliance with legislative requirements, versus what we can afford. So taking into consideration the revenue options available at our disposal, we must evaluate what is deemed to be a reasonable tax burden, what's appropriate user fee levels, as well as the utilization of reserves that support the future financial sustainability of the organization. And as a reminder, municipalities in Alberta are required by the MGA, the Municipal Government Act, to adopt what is called a balanced budget. And that essentially means that our revenues must be sufficient to pay all of our expenses. We are not permitted to run deficits. So to provide a little bit of a situational recap from last week's presentation, just some points to consider as we move forward, and those have been captured under what I've titled challenges here. The first, looking at cost containment. Cost containment efforts really have been, we've worked diligently on that and sustained that since 2020 with minimum or no impact to service levels. However, the inflationary impacts that we've seen are preventing cost containment in multiple areas, that will ultimately impact budget. We're seeing minimal new growth in assessment. This is being fueled by aging infrastructure and reduced investments following the downturn in oil and gas. We're seeing the lack of provincial and federal support on a few different fronts. Like I had alluded to just a short time ago, the provincial downloading through things like the police funding model, provincial policies such as depreciation models and adjustments to that, provincial funding through existing programs being reduced or having a great deal of uncertainty on that. So that lack of support still exists there. So while we do have a collection mechanism for, have a collection mechanism for oil and gas, we have been quite successful in our tax collection efforts. And as I had noted last week, we currently have 1.1 million outstanding, of which 500,000 of that is under payment agreements. And as we noted last week as well, the county has no reliance on borrowing, which is a great position to be in. While we do sit at 47% of our allowable debt limit, it is all related to the loan guarantee. The county has zero debt directly related to its own operations. So this provides a great deal of financial flexibility for the organization and ensures it's well positioned to address any of those, like I alluded to last week, unplanned events that may arise and support significant capital investments that will support the defined levels of service for the community. With our existing levels sitting at over 50 million, the county does have a healthy reserve levels as well. Optimum reserve levels, we talked a little bit about that last week and what that might look like going forward, and that's something we will work on in 2023 as part of our reserve strategy and policy. But the optimum reserve levels are really defined looking at a number of factors, including things like the total value of your municipal assets, the replacement and or disposal cost of those assets once they reach their end of life, age and condition of assets. So a number of different factors there that are taken into consideration. And as we move towards advancing the asset management function within the organization, administration will have greater availability to data that will support us in determining the future ideal reserve levels that support that long-term financial sustainability and ensuring that ratepayers continue to receive the level of service that they have been accustomed to receiving. Cost containment efforts that have been utilized to date, along with the strategic decisions of council, have resulted in real tax increases that have not been excessive in nature. So this picture really highlights that while the county has some challenges that it has and will continue to face going forward, we are well positioned to address those challenges in a fiscally healthy manner, while continuing to provide that high level of service to ratepayers with manageable impacts, and all while really continuing to support that long-term financial sustainability for the organization. So I've talked a little bit about inflation a number of times, both last week as well as in my presentation to this point this morning. I just want to show this as a bit of a visual demonstration for council and the community. In today's environment, like I had mentioned earlier, the MGA does require us to adopt a balanced budget, meaning that our revenues must be sufficient to pay all of our expenses. Today, expenses for the county are being impacted primarily by inflation. I'm sure we all can appreciate in our day-to-day lives, we've seen increased cost of things like groceries and gas. Similarly, municipalities like Kneehill County have increased costs as well. And ensuring we're able to manage the gap between the increased costs and revenues available to us is necessary to ensure we maintain that balanced budget. So on this slide, you can see the cumulative impact of inflation since 2015. You'll notice that there's been a significant climb that commenced in 2020 and continues on an upward trend today. The blue line at the bottom is a demonstration of the tax revenues that the county has at its disposal for each of the years highlighted here as well. That clear and growing gap between those two lines must be closed through things like cost containment efforts. However, that further growth in this gap will reach a point where the level of service provided will ultimately be impacted, and the only other alternative to bridging that gap is really increasing revenues. And there are, when it comes, because we don't have any control over inflation, unfortunately. We look at the revenues available to the county. Of all the revenues that we have at our disposal, the tax revenue makes up over 90% of that. So in this slide, you can see the total proposed tax revenue to be collected in 2023. We sit at approximately 5.5% lower than those that were collected in 2015. Alternatively, we saw in a previous slide that we had an approximately 18% increase in inflation over that same time period. So as I noted earlier, without increasing the total tax revenue, that gap can only be addressed through things like cost containment efforts or reductions in level of service. The administration has made great strides to absorb the impacts of inflation with those minimal impacts back to ratepayers. But the upward trend of inflation and therefore consequently the operating costs for the municipality is something that is concerning and will need to be looked at going forward. Just noting as well here, you can see on the slide that the tax levy proposed for 2023 assumes no mitigation of 2023 budget pressures that are presented to council last week, and any mitigation efforts would impact that number as well. So now I will slip into the budget overview, and here's where I pass the speaker off to Marika, and she will walk council through the core operating budget and provide the details that I had highlighted earlier when I opened my presentation.
Okay, just before we do that, anybody needing a break, or are we good? Okay, you need a break? All right. We're going to just take a 10-minute break, if we could, please, and then we'll go on with your presentation. Thank you. So we are in recess. So it's 9:41, and we'll call the meeting back to order. And Ms. Von Meerbach, whenever you're ready.
Good morning, Council. So today I'm going to go over the core operating budget. Last week we went through capital and operating projects. And so this week is really about core operations in terms of what's required to maintain existing service standards going forward. So it represents the revenues anticipated and the funding required to maintain operations at existing service levels. I'll outline what is included within the core operating budget and then provide an explanation of any changes in each line of the core operating budget. After that, I'm going to outline all the community grant programs which are supported within that core operating budget. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the details of all the reserve contributions included within the operating budget, and then as well outline the proposed draws for the operating and capital projects which were discussed last week. With all these pieces in mind, then I'll outline the overall impact being reviewed by council during budget discussions, and then I'll pass it back to Kinza to outline the next steps of the budget process. This slide just kind of shows the relationship between the project component that was presented to council last week and the operating budget that is being presented today. So as you can see on the left-hand side, there's the box that says operating budget, and the operating budget is funded through property taxes and user fees. The operating budget itself also has allocations that go into reserve funds, and reserve funds are then used to fund operating and capital projects. There's also external funding sources such as capital grants that can be used to fund some of those projects. So it's important to kind of show the relationship between these funds. The reason that we kind of operate off of this way is to maintain the core operating budget as a sort of stable number. Certain things fluctuate year to year, the reserve contributions can change, but something that is a one-time initiative that has a huge dollar value doesn't impact that year's tax rate specifically. It's kind of funded through that reserve component. So this slide shows the overall revenues that have been budgeted for within this. There's not significant fluctuations on each line to line. The most significant change is the transfers from reserves. And at this point in the budget process, none of those have been booked because typically those are only used to fund operating projects. So I'm going to go over kind of line by line what's included in each line, as well as what's kind of causing any fluctuations within that line. So the first item is licenses and permits. It primarily relates to the Planning and Development Department, and the increase in this line item is also related to Development and Safety Code permits, which have seen an increase in recent years. So this increase is in line with actuals that have been trending over the recent years. Operating grants consist of operating grants distributed by the provincial and federal governments. The increase is related to MSI operating funding. It's just a small increase related to inflationary pieces. Next is other revenue, which has decreased by $55,000. This line consists of revenues which do not fit into other specific categories. Much of this relates to the Transportation Department relating to industry activity. So of the $55,000 decrease in this line item, $50,000 relates to water agreements pertaining to oil and gas activity, which have not materialized in recent years. So we've adjusted the budget accordingly so that we'll stop seeing that negative variance when we come back and report quarterly to council. There's also a $5,000 decrease related to cost sharing for an economic development project that was included in the 2022 budget, but is not included within the 2023 budget. The next item is the sale of goods and services. This category includes revenues related to programs such as dust control, water utility revenues, and campground revenues. There's a few items within this function for which the budgeted revenues have changed, and this includes a $30,000 increase in bulk water revenues, a $30,000 increase in water line revenues, a $10,000 decrease in the budgeted park fees, and other small adjustments are reflective of actuals in recent years and include adjustments to bylaw reimbursement, dust control, scrap metal, tipping fees, plot sales, campgrounds, and map sales. And the last one on this slide is the sales to other governments. This category includes revenues related to agreements with neighboring municipalities, and the budgeted decrease reflects a few fluctuations. An $8,200 decrease in contracted peace officer and dispatch service reimbursements, a $13,000 increase in water management fees, a $14,000 decrease in transfer station income, and $3,500 decrease in cost sharing in revenues related to economic development related activities. The next item that we'll look at is rental income, which is decreased by a little bit. It contains revenues related to the rental of buildings owned by the county, as well as income from snow plowing and private laneways. The budgeted decrease relates to a $2,500 decrease in laneway snow plowing, a $4,000 decrease in surface lease agreements, and a $1,000 increase in fire hall rental revenues. The next item is penalties and fines, which has decreased by $4,000. This line includes revenues related to penalties on outstanding taxes, as well as fine revenue from peace officer operations, and the decrease only relates to the peace officer operations component of that piece. The next item is property taxes, which includes all municipal portions of all taxes collected by the county. This item represents the majority of the revenues. At this time, no change in budgeted property tax revenues has been accounted for because this item is one of the pieces which will be discussed by council in the process of moving towards a balanced budget. So we maintain that at existing levels pending further council discussion. The next item is special taxes and frontage. This category includes revenues related to water services, and no fluctuations were budgeted for based on an assessment of 2021 and 2022 actuals for this item. It should be noted that these ones are also contributed back to reserves because they're related to special improvement type levies. The next one is return on investments, which includes all investment revenues. This line item has not increased at this point and is again pending further council discussions regarding reserve strategies and the potential to utilize investment revenue to manage long-term inflationary growth of reserves. So we've identified that we've received more revenue in 2022 than this budget line item is representing. However, we're also looking at starting to utilize some of that investment revenue as a long-term protection to reserves and the inflationary growth on those reserves, which is why we haven't touched that line item at this point in deliberations. Transfer from reserves, so there's a significant decrease there of $849,000. Again, this is just because there are no operating projects included within the core operating budget at this point in time. And typically once those come online, there will be a transfer from reserves that'll show the revenue, and there will be the expenditure on the bottom line that'll show the expense. So the net impact on the shortfall there won't be one when that comes into the equation. And the last one in terms of revenues is a capital equipment plan sales. This line item has been maintained at a standard of $100,000, and there's a corresponding contribution to reserves under the expense section. So again, there's no bottom line impact on the budget resulting from capital equipment sales, but it's just that notation that anything that is sold from capital equipment that's being replaced in the year, that funding goes back into the reserves that the purchase has been funded out of. So moving on to expenses, this slide shows the overall impact of the expenses and what's going on. The next few slides will show the detail and anything that's fluctuated. Same kind of thing as with the revenue piece. So the first line item is contract goods and services, which has increased by $113,000. This item includes costs related to insurance, training and development, recruitment, software licensing, engineering, and contracted repairs and maintenance. And there's several fluctuations within this item that make up that $113,000. There's a $30,000 increase in training and development, some of which is health and safety related training and development. There's a $54,000 increase in internet, telephones, and alarm monitoring. There's a $17,000 increase in advertising costs. There's a $39,000 decrease in professional fees, including legal, engineering, and financial audit fees. There's a $16,000 decrease in contracted repairs and maintenance. There's a $49,000 increase in software and IT contracts, and a $17,000 increase in insurance costs. The next item is materials, goods, supplies, and utilities. So this item consists of goods and materials used in day-to-day operations, which includes fuel, fleet maintenance supplies, supplies for all buildings and properties owned and operated by the county, and utilities, including gas and water. And again, there are several fluctuations that make up the $209,000 increase. There's a $29,000 increase in general goods and supplies, which is kind of distributed across all departments. There's a $28,000 increase in the budget for fuel. There's a $100,000 decrease in shop supplies that relate to maintenance on the fleet. And this just has to do with some cost efficiencies that were determined kind of across departments and how we were breaking some of that down. There's a $19,000 increase in utility costs. There's a $213,000 increase in water for resale that is utilized to supply all of our water lines. There's a $23,000 increase in supplies for the road network, a $20,000 decrease in weed control chemicals, and a $17,000 increase in supplies for the water department. The salaries, wages, and benefits item, this line includes all costs associated with all employees of the county as well as remuneration for council. So the increase includes $386,000, which is required for merit and market increases to maintain wage levels at the 50th percentile, which has been previously set by council. There's $179,000 for the addition of 2 full-time staff, which are intended to progress council's strategic plan. There's a $105,000 increase in government contributions, which includes CPP, EI, as well as increases in the employee benefit rates. There's a $28,000 decrease in budgeted overtime, which was adjusted based on a review of the actual overtime expenditures in recent years.
Just before you go on, can we go back one?
Absolutely.
So we're anticipating an increase in water for resale, us having to pay an additional $213,000 to buy water, but we're not necessarily reflecting an increase in water sales on the income side to the same extent.
Not to the same.
Am I not reading that correctly?
No, to the chair, I think you're reading that correctly. So the water rate that the county's charging at this point in time hasn't changed. The rate that Aqua 7 charges us to buy water has. And so that's an issue that I think council is going to have to take a look at in the near future. Because when it comes to our facilities that are provided water by Aqua 7, the rate that we charge and the rate that we are charged, there's not a lot of difference between those rates currently.
Okay, so although we're budgeting a slight increase in bulk water sales, we're not, in this budget that's being presented at this point in time, we haven't really budgeted anything for increased revenue on regular water sales.
No, at this point in time, I think there's a future discussion there that council has to have around the rate, but we're looking at that as our current rate without any fluctuation.
Okay.
Or without any change to the rate would be a better way to say it.
Okay, sorry. Just took me a minute to process that and catch up there. Councillor Christie, you had a comment?
I have a water question. So the access to water for oil companies is not in this number at all then?
Yeah, it's in other revenue.
That's in the other revenue.
Yes.
I guess my question is, if they pump from the Bigelow Dam, we don't get anything. If they pump from Torrington, we get paid or not?
I believe that's correct.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions to this point? Okay, I was processing slower than you were going, so thank you for that.
No problem. I'm always happy to stop. Okay, so that rolled up salaries, wages, and benefits. I'll move on to other expenses. So this item includes solid waste operating costs, the recycling program, payment processing fees, and land care programming. And the increase in this line item relates to increasing solid waste management operations. The next item is a good news story on this one. The provision for allowances. So this item relates to tax write-offs for uncollectible taxes. And the outstanding arrears tax balance has decreased as old outstanding balances have either been collected or written off by council. It is anticipated that there will not be significant tax write-offs in the coming year. And so this budget has been decreased from $1 million down to $500,000 accordingly. Then the next one is purchases from other governments. This expenditure relates to agreements with neighboring municipalities as well as the province. Primarily the current police funding model payment and the Drumheller Solid Waste Commission payment are the two pieces that make up the majority of this piece. And the overall increase of $169,000 is entirely due to the funding required for the provincial police model. And that is the final increase as we are aware. So we are at the total of about $480,000 that we're contributing to the province annually for that. Next one is transfers to other governments. So this includes expenses for which agreements are in place with neighboring municipalities, and the increase from 2022 to 2023 is related to inflationary increases existing within existing agreements. Transfers to individuals and organizations. This item relates to funding to other organizations within the county for which there are agreements in place, and the increase again is related to inflationary increases contained within existing agreements. The last one on this slide is transferred to local board and agencies, and this item relates to funding for both FCSS programming and for participation in the Marigold Library System. Moving on to the last few, contributions to reserves. So these are our annual contributions that we're putting into reserves that fund one-time projects and the capital budget. The increase on this one is almost entirely related to the increase in costs of capital equipment, and we've reflected the increased contributions to reserves to offset some of those. In terms of operating projects, again, at this point, we haven't actually reflected any operating projects within the core operating budget, even though they've been presented to council last week. Those will be offset on the top end with a draw from reserves typically, and then the expense on the bottom line, so it won't impact that net shortfall that we're seeing. And then the last one is gravel inventory projects. So this item represents funding to crush gravel on an annual basis. Typically that funding's held at about $700,000. The decrease that you see from 2022 to 2023 is because we had some carry forward funding from 2021 into 2022 that was included in the 2022 budget. That was actually reserve funded as well last year. And so this year we're not pulling that money out of reserves, and we are just holding the base amount to crush gravel within the budget. So that kind of highlights the overall fluctuations within the revenue and expenditures. I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about what community grant programs are included, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about what reserves are looking like in this year's budget. So this next slide outlines all the community grant programs that are supported by council within the core operating budget. They're all listed out here. You'll note under council contingency, there's a strike through that amount. And we've, as administration on the back end, when we're kind of looking at some of the numbers, one of the recommendations that we're making to council to kind of mitigate the shortfall is the potential to take that funding out of the base budget. It has historically not been used in the last few years, and administration is confident that if things come up that are one-offs, they could either be funded through reserves or through other operating dollars that we've discovered aren't going to be spent within the year, and then that can be handled on a one-off basis if things come forward to council throughout the year.
So just before you leave that one, the arena funding that's being referred to there relates to the Ron Gore Memorial Arena?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so to go a little bit more in detail onto the reserve contributions that are included within the base budget just has that one line item of the total contributions. This is actually the breakdown of where those contributions are being made into which reserve they're being made to. And it should be noted that council last week saw an operating project put forward for $600,000 to offset some of the loss of MSI funding. That amount is not included in the $7.7 million. So if that is included within the core operating budget, then that amount would increase by $600,000. And which reserve it's contributed to is up for council discussion. Now the next one is just showing what's being proposed to be drawn out of reserves between operating and capital projects.
Okay, before you go there, you
yes.
have to go backwards for me again, sorry. So we're showing the capital equipment plan at the 2735 and change, 2,735,000 and change. The 416,000 that we referred to in contributions to reserves previously, is that the money that we already approved for the equipment and stuff where we had inflationary costs or not? So we have a contribution to reserves for capital equipment of 409.
That was the increased contributions to reserves. So we have a standard amount that we contribute to reserves for the capital equipment plan, and that 400,000 is an increased contribution from 2022 to 2023.
So that's included in this 2,700,000.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And through Mr. Chair, that was, I believe, last week when we went through this, we were posed the question whether we'd increase the contribution to capital equipment in light of what we're seeing for equipment prices.
Yeah.
That 400,000, when we answered yes, the 400,000 is that yes.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Carry on.
Absolutely.
We're having so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you for doing what you're doing, so.
Absolutely. Okay, so this one just shows the total draws that are being proposed to be pulled out of reserves. These are made up of, the first piece that capital projects pre-approved is the $4.5 million for capital equipment that was approved in late 2022. There is also that $3.2 million project for roads, but that one's funded out of MSI, so that's why that's not reflected in this table. And so then there's operating projects that are being put forward for $632,000. Those are the ones that we went through last week with council. And the capital projects, there's $2.3 million that are being proposed. Again, those went through with council in detail last week. And then this slide is showing the relationship between how much we are putting into reserves and how much is being drawn out of reserves within the 2023 budget. So council discussed last week, we kind of were talking about where that optimal number of reserve contributions is versus and where we sit. This kind of indicates, yes, we're making solid contributions to reserves on an annual basis. But as Kinza alluded to last week, when we kind of do some of that long-term reserve strategy looking, it would not be unreasonable to expect that optimal number to kind of be higher than what we're currently contributing. And that's just based off of the cost of replacing assets is continuously going up, maintaining that long-term infrastructure. We need a better plan in terms of that, but some of the things that we're doing behind the scenes in terms of progressing asset management, moving towards a more solidified reserve strategy, those are the things that are going to give us some of that information to improve that long-term outlook on what that optimal number should be. And actually, one more piece that I didn't write in my notes here that were on my handwritten notes somewhere. One of the questions was where our comparators are in terms of reserve contributions and their total operating budget. We're kind of middle of the pack on our first assessment of some of those numbers. We're kind of about in the middle of what is average for some of our comparators. We're running a little bit more detailed analysis on some of that information just because the piece of how many assets a county owns or what their reserves look like kind of play into what that optimal number looks like. So we're looking to bring some more detailed information on that back to council at a later date.
Thank you.
And so in overall, right now we're looking at a total operating budget shortfall of just under $1.7 million. Now, that is made up of $1,065,000 is on the core operating budget. So those are the revenues and expenses that have gone over this morning. That is $1 million shortfall sitting there. In addition, there's $630,000 worth of operating projects, which are being recommended to be funded through the operating budget, which is where that total $1.7 million comes in. And I think I can pass it back to Kinza now.
Thank you, Marika. I appreciate your detailed overview that you provided to council. Hopefully we haven't overloaded with too much information, but we appreciate the opportunity to share that with you. As a next step, council will review some of the different options that's available to them for closing that gap that Marika just identified, the just under 1.7 million. There are a number of options that are available to council as we move into those discussions and deliberations, including things that council may choose to accept or reject the proposed projects and service initiatives that Marika just highlighted that fall within the just over $600,000 range. They may make reductions to or deferrals to levels of service is another potential option on the table. We may look at things like tax rate adjustments, and council may also look at any combination of those, including managing the total tax rate and tax ratios that are assigned to each of the different assessment categories. So looking at some of those different options as we move forward, council will create their own solution for bridging that gap. And from here, I do want to pass it back to Deputy Reeve King. And I anticipate at this point, council will likely choose to go into closed session, where council will further look at deliberating on the different options that are available to them. So I just want to formally pass the mic back to Deputy Reeve King, and thank you very much for your attention and engagement and questions as we've gone through the information that was presented to council here today.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm not sure I want to take the baton back or not, but anyway, thank you. All right, so what is council's wish? You understand where conversation we're about to have, so want to do a little bit of closed session conversation before we move on? I would need a motion to that effect, if that's our wish.
So moved, I'll move us into closed session.
Councillor Christie has made the motion that we go into closed session. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. So we'll let the cone of silence drop and